He smiled, whispered sweet words, and kissed my daughter as if nothing could go wrong. But I knew the truth. His eyes told the real story. He was after her $10 million inheritance, and every second I hesitated was a chance for him to ruin her life. I had to act fast, and I had to be smarter than him. I moved in silence, hiding her inheritance where no one could find it. But what I uncovered next was worse than I imagined. Secrets, lies, and betrayals that could destroy everything. And in that moment, I realized protecting her wasn't just about money. It was a matter of life or ruin. Welcome to your ultimate destination for gripping revenge stories, family betrayals, shocking betrayals, and emotional justice. Dive into tales where heartbreak turns into fury, secrets are exposed, and justice is served. Each story will keep you on the edge of your seat, questioning loyalty, trust, and morality. Subscribe now and join a community that loves suspense, drama, and stories that hit deep, because everyone wants to see justice served. Are you ready to witness the ultimate payback? Now let's get started. Jackson stood at the edge of the grand oak-paneled ballroom, the sound of champagne flutes clinking and distant laughter swirling around him. Today was Helen's wedding day, a day he had imagined since the moment she was born. She looked radiant, draped in ivory silk, her hair cascading like molten gold. Every smile she cast toward her new husband, David, warmed his heart. Jackson had spent a lifetime providing for her, shielding her from life's harshest realities. Every success, every sacrifice had been for this moment. Yet beneath the sparkling chandeliers, a quiet unease had settled in his chest. Jackson had known David for months, carefully observing the man who now held his daughter's hand. Outwardly charming and impeccably polite, David was everything Helen thought a husband should be. But Jackson's instincts, honed from years navigating corporate betrayal and high-stakes decisions, whispered a warning. Something in David's subtle glances lingered too long, a hint of calculation in the way he watched Helen's expressions when money was mentioned. Helen, oblivious to her father's quiet concern, leaned into David, her laughter ringing like crystal. She was blissfully ignorant, her trust untainted. Jackson's gaze flickered to the envelope tucked discreetly in his inner jacket pocket, a simple, innocuous-looking folder containing Helen's $10 million inheritance. It had been a gift from her late mother, a fortune meant to secure her dreams, her independence. Today, Jackson had made a choice. He would hide it, not to punish Helen, but to protect her from a man whose smile could disguise a heart of greed. The ceremony had passed with laughter and tears, vows whispered with trembling voices, but Jackson's mind lingered on one unsettling thought: how easily people wore masks. The ballroom swelled with celebration, but to Jackson, each cheer echoed like a warning bell. He remembered the stories of men who charmed their way into families, only to drain them dry. He had lived through corporate sharks and betrayal among friends. Now, he feared his own daughter's happiness was at stake. After the formalities, as Helen danced with her new husband, Jackson slipped out to the library, a private sanctuary where shadows mingled with the rich scent of leather-bound books. He opened the drawer in the antique mahogany desk, carefully placing Helen's inheritance in a hidden compartment only he knew. The weight of the folder was nothing compared to the weight on his heart. He loved Helen fiercely, but love alone could not protect her from cunning deceit. Jackson closed the hidden drawer. He felt the first sharp pang of betrayal. Not from David yet, but from the invisible threat he sensed lurking beneath polite smiles and promises. Helen was unknowing, blissfully trusting, and that made the sting sharper. One day, he knew the truth would reveal itself, and when it did, the man who dared betray his family would regret ever stepping into their lives. Tonight, laughter filled the halls. Tomorrow, a plan would begin, a silent, calculated game of vigilance, cunning, and protective justice. Jackson would not allow his daughter's fortune or her heart to fall into the wrong hands. And he knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of a battle that would test every fiber of his moral compass. Days after the wedding, Jackson's unease grew into a gnawing certainty. What had seemed like subtle glances now became sharp, calculated movements. David's charm no longer hid the edges of ambition. The way he lingered over conversations about wealth, subtly probing Helen about her financial independence. Jackson had watched enough boardrooms and backroom deals to recognize the pattern. David wasn't here for love. He was here for leverage, for control. It happened one evening during a quiet dinner at the family estate. Helen laughed at one of David's jokes, unaware of the tension in her father's eyes. Jackson noticed the way David's hand brushed hers, too deliberate, too possessive. And then the words that finally pierced the calm, the ones that made Jackson's chest tighten and pulse with rage. "Helen, we need to talk about your inheritance. I think it's time we invest it wisely, together." Jackson froze. His fork hovered over his plate, clattering slightly as his grip tightened. "Together," he asked evenly, masking the fury that surged beneath his skin. "Yes," David said smoothly, leaning forward, voice honeyed but edged with steel. "I want us to manage your finances as a team. It's the smart thing to do." Helen would agree. Helen, caught between love and surprise, smiled nervously. "Well, Dad always says he trusts us to make the right choices." Jackson's heart sank. That trust, so innocent, so beautiful, was exactly what David intended to exploit. He realized, with a sharp pang of fear, that Helen was blind to the danger she was in. And David had no intention of stopping. The thought of his daughter being manipulated, her fortune seized, ignited a fire in Jackson's veins. Later that night, Jackson sat alone in the library, staring at the hidden envelope containing Helen's inheritance. The weight of it pressed against him in a way that went beyond money. It was her safety, her future, her independence. He replayed every conversation, every subtle glance from David, and felt the bitter taste of betrayal before it had even fully occurred. Jackson's mind raced. He saw visions of Helen's laughter turning into tears, of David's calm charm twisting into cold calculation. Every instinct he had honed over decades screamed, "Act now, or the damage would be irreversible." The father who had celebrated his daughter's marriage now sat in shadow, trembling with the first real glimpse of the enemy in his home. The breaking point came the next morning. Jackson overheard a hushed phone conversation while passing the terrace. David's voice, smooth, confident, and cold, promising someone a quick arrangement that would secure Helen's fortune. Every word sent ice down Jackson's spine. Helen's trust was a fortress being quietly breached, and he was powerless to stop it unless he intervened with cunning and precision. It was in that moment Jackson understood the cruel reality. This wasn't a fleeting threat. It was an orchestrated betrayal, and Helen's innocence was a weapon against her. Rage mixed with fear in his chest, and he clenched his fists. He would not let this man win. Not her fortune, not her heart, not her life's happiness. Jackson's vow solidified in the quiet of the estate's corridors. He would protect Helen, no matter the cost. The inheritance would remain hidden. The truth would surface, and David's schemes would crumble under the weight of careful, deliberate revenge. The breaking point had passed. The game had begun. The estate was quiet now, but Jackson's mind was anything but. Nights became his domain, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows across the library as he pored over ledgers, documents, and legal papers. Helen slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that her world teetered on the edge of betrayal. Jackson had retreated into a private war, a descent into obsession, fueled by rage, fear, and the relentless drive to protect. He replayed every interaction with David, dissecting each smile, each word, each seemingly casual question about finances. The man's charm now seemed sinister, a mask hiding calculated intent. Jackson's chest tightened with every memory. The rage he felt was a visceral storm that left him restless, sleepless, pacing the long corridors of the estate as if the walls themselves whispered warnings. The father's protective instincts collided with his morality. Could he manipulate events, spy, or deceive without losing himself? Was he justified in creating a web of secrets to shield Helen? Every principle he had lived by now felt like a fragile barrier against the abyss. Yet every time he glimpsed the folder containing her $10 million inheritance, he felt the weight of responsibility like iron chains around his heart. Jackson sought guidance from memories of his late wife, Helen's mother. Her voice echoed in his mind. Trust your instincts, Jackson. Always. Protect them, even if the world doesn't understand. The words became his mantra. He revisited old strategies, recalling the cunning and patience that had seen him through corporate battles and personal betrayals. Now, those same skills were redirected toward a single goal, outmaneuvering a man who thought he had Helen's future in his pocket. As days turned into nights, Jackson began to craft his plan. Small, deliberate moves at first, testing David's intentions, gauging his reactions, planting seeds of doubt and observation. Every encounter became a chess game. He watched the man's habits, analyzed conversations, and noted every slip of arrogance. Jackson's once peaceful home transformed into a battlefield of silent observation, each corridor a corridor of vigilance, each room a stage for calculated action. Isolation weighed heavily. Friends and neighbors marveled at Helen's new life, blissfully ignorant of the tension beneath polished surfaces. Jackson barely spoke to anyone outside family matters, his focus absolute. Obsession sharpened his mind, but also gnawed at his soul. He felt the creeping moral erosion of a man willing to manipulate and deceive, even if for a righteous cause. Each small victory and observation came at the cost of a piece of innocence, a part of himself he feared he might never reclaim. Yet in the darkest hours, Jackson's resolve crystallized. He could not falter. Helen's trust, her life, her fortune, all depended on him navigating this descent carefully. The line between justice and vengeance blurred, but he pressed forward. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and David's schemes could irreversibly destroy everything. Jackson embraced the darkness, not as evil, but as armor. Every sleepless night, every whispered plan, every calculated observation became a shield and a weapon. The descent was necessary. The game had begun, and Jackson knew that to save Helen, he must master both the shadows around them and the shadows within himself. The estate was quiet now, but Jackson's mind was anything but. Nights became his domain, the flickering lamplight casting long shadows across the library as he pored over ledgers, documents, and legal papers. Helen slept peacefully upstairs, unaware that her world teetered on the edge of betrayal. Jackson had retreated into a private war, a descent into obsession, fueled by rage, fear, and the relentless drive to protect. He replayed every interaction with David, dissecting each smile, each word, each seemingly casual question about finances. The man's charm now seemed sinister, a mask hiding calculated intent. Jackson's chest tightened with every memory. The rage he felt was a visceral storm that left him restless, sleepless, pacing the long corridors of the estate as if the walls themselves whispered warnings. The father's protective instincts collided with his morality. Could he manipulate events, spy, or deceive without losing himself? Was he justified in creating a web of secrets to shield Helen? Every principle he had lived by now felt like a fragile barrier against the abyss. Yet every time he glimpsed the folder containing her $10 million inheritance, he felt the weight of responsibility like iron chains around his heart. Jackson sought guidance from memories of his late wife, Helen's mother. Her voice echoed in his mind. Trust your instincts, Jackson. Always. Protect them, even if the world doesn't understand. The words became his mantra. He revisited old strategies, recalling the cunning and patience that had seen him through corporate battles and personal betrayals. Now, those same skills were redirected toward a single goal, outmaneuvering a man who thought he had Helen's future in his pocket. As days turned into nights, Jackson began to craft his plan. Small, deliberate moves at first, testing David's intentions, gauging his reactions, planting seeds of doubt and observation. Every encounter became a chess game. He watched the man's habits, analyzed conversations, and noted every slip of arrogance. Jackson's once peaceful home transformed into a battlefield of silent observation, each corridor a corridor of vigilance, each room a stage for calculated action. Isolation weighed heavily. Friends and neighbors marveled at Helen's new life, blissfully ignorant of the tension beneath polished surfaces. Jackson barely spoke to anyone outside family matters, his focus absolute. Obsession sharpened his mind, but also gnawed at his soul. He felt the creeping moral erosion of a man willing to manipulate and deceive, even if for a righteous cause. Each small victory and observation came at the cost of a piece of innocence, a part of himself he feared he might never reclaim. Yet in the darkest hours, Jackson's resolve crystallized. He could not falter. Helen's trust, her life, her fortune, all depended on him navigating this descent carefully. The line between justice and vengeance blurred, but he pressed forward. One misstep, one moment of hesitation, and David's schemes could irreversibly destroy everything. Jackson embraced the darkness, not as evil, but as armor. Every sleepless night, every whispered plan, every calculated observation became a shield and a weapon. The descent was necessary. The game had begun, and Jackson knew that to save Helen, he must master both the shadows around them and the shadows within himself. The estate, once a sanctuary of comfort and family, now pulsed with tension. Jackson moved like a shadow, deliberate and unseen, weaving through corridors and conversations. Every gesture, every word, every smile from David was now scrutinized with the precision of a hawk. The man's ambition was no longer subtle, it was predatory. Jackson knew that to protect Helen, he could no longer wait. the hunt had begun. Jackson's first moves were subtle, almost imperceptible. He began redirecting conversations, planting small obstacles to David's schemes. A slight delay on a legal document, a hint of concern about an investment opportunity, a casual suggestion to review financial plans thoroughly, all designed to test the man's intentions and reactions. Each ripple he created exposed more of David's true nature. The thrill of control, however, was tempered by unease. Jackson's moral compass spun under the weight of his actions. Was he already becoming the manipulator, the schemer, the deceiver he had sworn to oppose? He reminded himself of Helen's innocence, her laughter, the trust she had placed in him. This wasn't about vengeance for himself. It was protection. Yet the line between justice and retribution blurred with every careful maneuver. Jackson observed David in the evenings, noting patterns, habits, and vulnerabilities. He discovered inconsistencies, secret calls, unexplained trips, minor lies that hinted at a grander plan. With every revelation, Jackson felt both fury and exhilaration. The man believed he was untouchable, charming everyone with ease. But Jackson had patience, intellect, and a relentless drive rooted in love. One evening, Jackson intercepted a private conversation David believed was hidden, where the man outlined intentions to access Helen's inheritance through subtle manipulation. Jackson's pulse raced. He had waited for this, a clear glimpse of the betrayal, the proof he needed to act decisively. Yet he restrained himself, masking anger behind a calm, almost polite exterior. Every move had to be calculated. One misstep could tip David off. To sharpen his advantage, Jackson began using allies discreetly, trusted legal advisors and loyal staff who understood the stakes without knowing all the details. Together, they created a network of surveillance and precaution, ensuring that David could neither access Helen's funds nor exploit her naivety. Jackson's tactics were quiet but effective. Small disruptions began eroding David's confidence, causing subtle cracks in the carefully constructed facade of charm. The thrill of the hunt was intoxicating, but it also took a toll. Jackson found himself lying more, watching more, calculating more, every action a potential moral compromise. He had descended deep into a game of shadows, and with each move, the stakes climbed higher. Yet for all the danger, for all the ethical tension, Jackson felt a grim satisfaction. He was closer to protecting Helen, closer to exposing the man who threatened everything they held dear. By the end of this act, Jackson had become both strategist and guardian, a man walking the knife edge of morality. The hunt was no longer a plan. It was a war, silent and invisible, waged in whispers, glances, and hidden documents. And every step brought him closer to the moment when David's true nature would be laid bare, and the father's wrath and protection would demand its reckoning. Jackson had thought he understood the man, David, the charming, ambitious husband, driven by greed. But that belief shattered one rainy afternoon. The droplets tracing silver paths down the library windows as Jackson sat, hidden, listening to a conversation that would change everything. David's voice was low, confident, yet tinged with arrogance, as he spoke into the phone. Yes, the inheritance. I've already got Helen wrapped around my finger. By next month, it will all be in my accounts. Nothing can stop me now. Jackson's stomach twisted. The man's ambition went beyond mere manipulation. It was an outright scheme to claim Helen's fortune entirely, leaving her stripped of her independence, and perhaps her trust in the world. But then came the line that froze Jackson's blood. "Don't worry about her father. He's too proud to interfere. One wrong move, and he'll just look foolish." Jackson's fists clenched so tightly the veins in his forearms stood out. He had underestimated David's audacity. The betrayal ran deeper than he had imagined. David wasn't merely greedy. He was calculating, patient, and ruthlessly clever. Every smile, every word, every moment of charm that had lulled Helen, and even Jackson himself, into trust was a thread in a web meticulously designed to ensnare them both. Suddenly, flashes of past interactions fell into terrifying clarity. The seemingly innocent suggestions about investments, the probing questions about her inheritance, the subtle persuasion to sign documents, each was part of a grander, malicious plan. Jackson realized the stakes weren't just financial. They were emotional, psychological, even legal. Helen's world, her happiness, and her future were at the mercy of a man who believed he could manipulate both daughter and father. The revelation sparked a complex storm inside Jackson. Anger boiled, yes, but now it mingled with fear and urgency. Every calculated move he had made so far, the hidden inheritance, the subtle disruptions, the surveillance, was necessary but insufficient. David was cleverer than Jackson had first estimated. This was no longer a matter of minor interventions. It was a war, and Jackson needed to escalate his strategy. Yet amid the fury, a sliver of clarity emerged. Jackson understood that raw anger alone would not protect Helen. Precision, patience, and moral cunning were required. Every action must anticipate David's moves, outmaneuver his plans, and expose him without harming Helen. The father's love had transformed into tactical brilliance. He was no longer merely reacting. He was preparing for the decisive confrontation that would reveal the truth, safeguard his daughter, and strip David of the illusion of control. By the time the rain ceased, Jackson had outlined a new plan. Every ally, every precaution, every hidden asset was ready to deploy. He knew the next steps were critical. The closer he drew to the truth, the more dangerous the game would become. But Jackson no longer feared the depth of David's betrayal. He understood it. And with that understanding came resolve. The man who dared to threaten Helen's future would soon meet a reckoning meticulously orchestrated by a father's love and vengeance. Jackson never thought he would need help. He was a man who had built his life on careful strategy, discipline, and trust earned through years of experience. Yet, as he observed David's manipulations escalating, he realized that some battles required more than intellect. They required insight, loyalty, and someone who shared his understanding of betrayal. That ally arrived in the form of Claire, Helen's longtime family friend and Jackson's former colleague in the corporate world. Claire had witnessed the same hints Jackson had, though she had been slower to act. She was sharp, resourceful, and driven by a quiet moral code that mirrored Jackson's own. When Jackson confided in her, partially, leaving Helen's welfare as the focal point rather than his personal vendetta, Claire's eyes sparkled with a mixture of empathy and determination. "I've seen this before," she said softly, her voice tinged with both caution and resolve. "Men like David thrive on trust they don't deserve. We need to stay 3 steps ahead, but Helen must never know until it's safe." Jackson felt a strange relief, a lightness he hadn't experienced since realizing the full extent of David's deceit. Having Claire at his side did more than bolster strategy. It reminded him that he was not alone in protecting Helen. She was meticulous, her approach complementary to his own. While Jackson was relentless, Claire provided perspective, ensuring that neither blind rage nor obsession clouded judgment. Together, they began refining the plan. Surveillance intensified, subtle traps were laid, and contingencies accounted for every possible move David might make. Claire suggested legal maneuvers that Jackson had not considered, while he applied psychological insights and intuition, anticipating David's overconfidence and arrogance. The combination was potent, a dance of intellect and foresight designed to expose David without harming Helen. But the alliance did more than improve the tactical approach. It humanized Jackson. In Claire's presence, he allowed himself rare moments of vulnerability. He admitted fears he had kept buried. The possibility of failing Helen, of misjudging David, of crossing a line that might forever change him. And in those moments, he realized that revenge alone could not be the end game. Protection, justice, and ultimately redemption for both Helen and himself were just as critical. Together, they discovered David's weaknesses, impulsive tendencies, moments of pride that could be exploited, and the hidden alliances he relied upon. Every insight became a weapon, every observation a shield. And yet, Jackson remained aware that trust, even in an ally, was a calculated risk. Claire, like him, had her own motivations, though aligned with his mission. The father had learned the harsh lesson that even the best intentions could hide peril. But for now, they were united. As days passed, the alliance solidified, blending strategy with loyalty and vigilance with compassion. Jackson's obsession, once isolating, now had purpose and structure. His rage no longer dominated. It was tempered by Claire's presence and the shared mission. Together, they would expose David's duplicity, safeguard Helen's future, and orchestrate the reckoning that was coming. The father, once descending alone into darkness, now had a light in the form of alliance, a reminder that even vengeance could coexist with trust, compassion, and redemption. Jackson had come to rely on Claire's steady presence, her insight, and her unwavering dedication to protecting Helen. Together, they had woven a careful net of observation, strategy, and subtle interventions. But even the most meticulous plans are vulnerable to the unpredictable nature of human emotion and betrayal. It began with a single phone call, Claire's voice strained and hesitant. "Jackson, there's something I need to tell you." Her words carried an unfamiliar weight, a tremor that froze him mid-step. She confessed that, in a moment of desperation, she had secretly communicated with David, promising information that could help him gain leverage over Jackson, under the belief that it would protect her own family from exposure. Jackson's stomach turned. The very ally he had trusted implicitly had now stepped across the moral line, flirting with the same kind of manipulation and deceit he had been fighting to contain. Rage surged, but it was tempered by shock and disbelief. How could she, Claire, who had mirrored his pain, who had pledged loyalty, risk everything for a fleeting sense of self-preservation? Jackson realized that her actions, though not malicious in intent, mirrored the exact moral corruption he had vowed to prevent. Trust, he now knew, was a fragile commodity, and even the closest bonds could fracture under pressure. The betrayal sent Jackson spiraling. He questioned every action, every alliance, every decision he had made. Was he becoming the very thing he despised? Had his obsession with revenge and protection begun to erode his judgment? turning him into a manipulator as cunning and morally compromised as David himself. The weight of this internal conflict was suffocating. He paced the darkened estate halls, the hidden envelope containing Helen's inheritance pressing like a leaden reminder against his chest. Yet amid the chaos, clarity emerged. Jackson realized that Claire's betrayal, though painful, was also a test, not of loyalty, but of his own resolve. He could succumb to anger, sever the alliance, and risk isolation, or he could recalibrate, acknowledge the moral compromise, and find a new way forward. The choice was agonizing. Vengeance demanded ruthlessness, but protection demanded wisdom. By midnight, Jackson had made a decision. He would confront Claire, not with fury, but with strategy. Together, they would repair the fracture in their alliance, realigning their goals while imposing clear boundaries. He could no longer afford emotional miscalculations. The game had become deadly serious. As Jackson prepared for the next phase, he reflected on the true cost of obsession and vengeance. The father who had once walked a narrow path of moral clarity now understood the peril of even the slightest ethical compromise. Yet, he also understood that darkness, betrayal, deception, and moral ambiguity could be wielded not only as a weapon, but as a tool to protect what mattered most. Helen's future, her inheritance, and her trust were worth every shadow, every risk, every ethical negotiation. The betrayal had shaken him to the core, but it had also sharpened his focus. Jackson would not fail, not now, not ever. If the enemy's game was deception, his response would be mastery. And when David finally faced the consequences of his greed, Jackson knew the reckoning would be devastating and just. The day of reckoning arrived with a brittle, electric tension that seemed to hum through the walls of the estate. Jackson had orchestrated every detail, every observation, every subtle intervention culminating in this moment. David believed himself untouchable, confident that Helen, and by extension, Jackson, remained oblivious. He was wrong. Jackson confronted David in the study, the room heavy with the scent of polished wood and faint rain seeping through the windows. Helen had been told only that a financial discussion required her presence. She entered last, her eyes bright but curious, unknowing that she was about to witness the culmination of her father's quiet vigilance. David, confident as ever, extended a hand, smiling. "Jackson, what is all this about?" Jackson's gaze was cold, unflinching. "About honesty," he said simply. "About trust, and about what you tried to take from my daughter." He stepped aside, gesturing to a set of documents Claire had carefully prepared, evidence of David's secret attempts to access Helen's inheritance, falsified agreements, hidden bank accounts, and recorded conversations. Each piece laid bare David's greed and manipulation, leaving no room for charm or denial. Helen's eyes widened as she took in the evidence. Her hand instinctively found Jackson's, a silent reassurance amidst the storm. David's confident facade faltered, his composure cracking under the weight of exposure. The man who had thought himself clever, untouchable, began to stammer, the realization that his schemes had been thoroughly unraveled sinking in. "Why?" David finally whispered, the arrogance gone, replaced with desperation. "Why would you do this?" Jackson's voice was steady, resolute. "Because you underestimated a father's love. Because you thought trust was a weakness. Because Helen deserves more than deception. And because every action has consequences." In that room, Jackson made a choice. He could humiliate David, destroy him utterly, exact vengeance in a way that would satisfy raw anger. But he paused, seeing Helen's face filled with a mixture of fear, relief, and clarity. The lesson she needed was not about her father's fury. It was about justice, truth, and resilience. He handed the evidence to Helen, allowing her to witness the betrayal firsthand. "You decide how to proceed," Jackson said softly. "Justice is ours, but vengeance belongs to no one." David's defeat was complete. Legal authorities, carefully pre-informed by Jackson and Claire, now had every document they needed to act. Helen's inheritance remained intact, her trust preserved, and David's schemes dismantled without unnecessary cruelty. The reckoning was more than exposure. It was a moral triumph. Jackson had navigated the treacherous path of obsession, strategy, and ethical compromise, emerging not only victorious but wiser. The father who had once descended into darkness now stood in the light of deliberate justice, tempered by love and clarity. As David was escorted from the estate, Helen hugged her father tightly. No words were needed. Jackson had protected her, exposed the villain, and preserved her world. But more importantly, he had chosen justice over raw vengeance, teaching both himself and Helen the true power of calculated morality. The estate had returned to a semblance of calm. The rain had cleared, sunlight spilling across the manicured gardens and casting long, golden rays into the library where Jackson sat quietly. Helen moved gracefully through the rooms, her laughter lighter than it had been in weeks, yet tinged with the sobering awareness of what could have been. Jackson watched her, his chest heavy but relieved. The inheritance, now untouched and secure, symbolized more than money. It represented protection, foresight, and love. But the lessons extended beyond finances. Helen had glimpsed the depths of human greed, the subtlety of deception, and the strength required to confront it without losing herself. And Jackson, for all his planning, realized he too had changed. He no longer needed the obsessive vigilance that had consumed him for weeks. Claire remained nearby, her alliance solidified and trust rebuilt. Yet Jackson understood that the greatest battles were fought within. The dark nights of paranoia, the sleepless hours of plotting, the moral compromises, all had shaped him into a man who balanced love with strategy, anger with reason, and vengeance with justice. Helen approached, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of gratitude and newfound maturity. "Thank you, Dad," she said softly, "not just for protecting me, but for showing me how careful we must be with trust, with people, with ourselves." Jackson nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in weeks. "The world is full of masks, Helen. Some wear them for kindness, some for greed. But knowing how to see through them, that's what keeps us safe. That's what keeps love intact." In the following weeks, life returned to routine. David's legal exposure and social disgrace ensured he could no longer interfere, while Helen regained her independence and confidence, more aware than ever of her father's wisdom. Jackson occasionally caught himself reflecting on the shadows he had navigated, reminders of the descent, the hunt, and the betrayal within. But those memories were tempered by the clarity of the choices he had made. The hidden inheritance remained secure, a testament to foresight, patience, and calculated protection. Jackson allowed himself one quiet moment in the library, opening the hidden compartment just enough to glance at the folder. It was more than wealth. It was the embodiment of vigilance, the power of ethical strategy, and the strength of a father's love. Jackson realized that revenge, while seductive, was not the ultimate goal. The true victory was in safeguarding those you love, confronting betrayal without succumbing to it, and emerging not only unbroken, but morally whole. Helen's laughter from the garden carried through the windows, a reminder that the world could be both dangerous and beautiful, and that careful, thoughtful love could preserve the best of both. The storm had passed. Shadows remained, but Jackson had learned to navigate them. He had protected his daughter, exposed the deceiver, and in doing so, reaffirmed the values that defined him. Justice had been served, but redemption, personal, ethical, and familial, was the lasting reward. And as he closed the hidden drawer for the final time, Jackson allowed himself a small, rare smile. The battle had ended, the inheritance was safe, and Helen's future was hers to claim, free from the shadows of greed. Was my calculated revenge worth it? Tell me what you would have done in my place. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.